Now you might not believe me when I say this,
She's gonna no!
but this game
Tonight, no!
is actually really fun.
Don't do it!
See, doesn't he look like he's enjoying himself? Developed by Red Hook Studios in the pre-Mask era of 2016, Darkest Dungeon is one of those games I keep finding myself coming back to every now and then, even though I've only ever managed to beat it once. In an endless sea of turn-based RPGs, this one stands out from the crowd by not focusing on some pretty anime boy, and by not having the power of friendship being the key to defeating the evil bad guy. There ain't gonna be any anime waifus in this game. Although... But between the heavily shaded set design and the buttery smooth narration that makes me feel just all kinds of something.
Mastery over life and death was chief among my early pursuits. I began in humility, but my ambition was limitless. Who could have divined the prophetic import of something as unremarkable as a twitch in the leg of a dead rat?
There's no doubt that this game is dripping with style. So settle in,
Grab yourself a snack and a glass of orange juice.
and we'll take a quick jog down to the huge nerd estate so I can explain just what makes this game so special.
Perhaps things are not as bad as they seem.
In Darkest Dungeon, you play as the heir to a crumbling, totally not evil plot of land that you got from your ancestor after he died of... natural causes. The area surrounding the property is overrun with all sorts of wretched horrors, and it's your job to clear them out, take the main castle back from the invaders, and rebuild your ruined hamlet to its former glory. To get us started though, I want to shine a spotlight on the gameplay first. Think back for a minute to how combat works in most traditional RPGs. Whenever you attack something, or use a spell, you get a quick little animated GIF flashing on the enemy sprite for about 2 seconds. Or in the case of Pokemon, the character model just... yeah. And honestly, I myself am a huge fan of usual RPG shenanigans, but here's how an attack plays out in Darkest Dungeon.
Destroyed.
Oh. The heavy whoosh of your swing, the sound of the impact, the camera zooming in to get a better view of the characters that are moving around. They're all just minor enhancements, but those simple design choices add so much more weight to what's going on screen. Going back to the combat though, you don't do any fighting yourself. Instead, as a newly minted member of the 1%, you assemble a crew of... heroes? To send headfirst into the hot zone on your behalf. Each week, a new random assortment of suckers arrives at the hamlet, and it's your job to filter out the weenies and gather the strongest guys you can. Throw bottles of disease at a bunch of fish with the plague doctor. Grab the crusader and accuse spiders of religious crime. Play some sick guitar riffs and then stab a guy with a jester. Miss every single one of your attacks with the leper, the possibilities truly are... well, not unlimited, but there's a lot of really solid options. But you don't want your characters getting stale, so to keep things interesting, every hero has a list of random personality traits, quirks, when you hire them, and each one comes with a different effect. Some quirks are just straight up buffs, like how having Beast Hater means you do more damage against beast-type enemies. Others, though, are a bit more... inconvenient. Dark Temptation. Prone to investigating the dark arts? Man, me too, get on in here.
5 minutes later.
And now he has the Red Plague, which is a 75% reduction in bleed resistance. It becomes this fun little balancing act every time you decide to hire someone new, and building your roster is one of your first real tastes of just how important your individual decisions are in this game. Do you value that hero's skills or their class more than you fear their negative quirks? Or do you avoid the risk entirely and hope for a better hero next time, potentially leaving you without whatever character you might need right now for your current mission? It's pretty rare for there to be any perfect choice to make in this game, so most of the time you just gotta deal with whatever cards you've been dealt. That in turn though means this is one of those rare RPGs where you can't just turn your brain off while you play. Unless you're constantly thinking about the best possible choice you can make in any one given situation, it won't be long before your party gets wiped out. And they will get wiped out. Once your squad is built the way you like, and once you've removed all your money by getting rid of Reynald's kleptomania quirk, just trust me on this, that's when your quest truly begins. Much like Hyrule Castle and Breath of the Wild, your final goal is always there in the distance too. But unless you're some kind of speedrunner, you'll probably want to wet your whistle on a few of the other dungeons first.
You don't even have to use it. It just does it automatically.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, welcome to fucking
Darkest dungeon.
The areas that surround the main castle are filled with their own unique monsters and obstacles. Whenever you pick one to explore, you get a few different options for what your mission that time could be, like killing all the enemies or gathering some scattered goods for your town. The dungeon maps themselves range from short hikes to... But since they're all randomly generated, for the most part, your own luck plays a huge role in how well the mission goes overall. You'll also need to have enough money on hand to stock up on supplies for the trip, meaning things like food, bandages, essential oils, that kind of thing. But if you don't have the cash to burn on those items, you might have to start traveling a bit lighter than you're comfortable with. Like, spending the last of your money on a few extra torches could be the right decision, but if you happen to run into any roadblocks, you'll wish you had grabbed a shovel instead so you wouldn't have to move all that broken glass with your bare hands. In terms of your party though, you're only allowed to take 4 people into a dungeon at once, and the usual RPG method of just throw your guy with the biggest number in there isn't gonna cut it this time around. For example, those skeletons that live in the ruins map are immune to bleed damage because, well...
What am I doing wrong? Come on! Why? Tell me! Hey!
Well, being a skeleton, I'm already dry as a bone.
Meanwhile, each hero can only equip 4 of their 8 possible skills at any one moment, so if you're about to enter an area that has a lot of calcium warriors, you might want to avoid equipping your bleed-centric skills to your clear of them.
For the Bone Brothers! The Bone Brothers!
That's a spicy pizza! Oh no! Oh, he got me with the fucking...
Speaking of skills though, each one only works in the first place if the hero's standing in the right spot for it, which does make the order you put your 4 lepers in pretty important. As you fight different enemies or face different events, your party's order can get shuffled around mid-combat, which suddenly makes your hyper-buff frontliner completely useless when he gets hen-tied to the back of the line. Luckily though, the same thing does apply to the bad guys, so if that wine mom skeleton is causing a few too many wet t-shirt contests for your liking, you can just yank it to the front to seriously cut down its firepower.
Oh no.
There's a surprising level of depth that comes from how you decide to build your team. Even if you have a bunch of the same hero back at the hamlet, how you use them can change very dramatically just by choosing a different set of active skills or items. Take the Highwayman for instance. He's got some moves that make him a pretty good ranged attacker, letting him take pot shots at the backline or deal moderate damage to a whole group of enemies at once. Or, you know, if you're not into that, you can always just... But hey, it's up to you. Anyway, while you wander the sewers beneath Taco Bell, you'll start slowly running into these things called Curios. Curios are randomly scattered around the dungeons, and they all have their own list of possible effects based on how you interact with them. Sometimes they're helpful, giving you things like free supplies or a stat buff whenever you come across them. Hey there girl, are you an antiquarian? Because this sack's contents are yours. Most of the time though, they're a gamble, which makes each one you find a sudden game of, can you afford to risk it? Alright contestant, you've just found yourself a shelf full of old library books in that same hallway you fought those giant writhing maggots in. If you decide to open one, it'll either contain a map that reveals all the hidden rooms in this dungeon, or your ancestors' private stash of Wario and Toadette / fiction. How lucky do you feel? But despite how it might seem at first glance, this is one of the many cases in Darkest Dungeon where you have a bit more control over things than you'd think. Like, if you're desperate for cash, you could stick your hand in this random tree hollow to see if there's anything valuable hidden inside, but if you pay attention to this handy little slot, you could instead try to use a tool to make your search a bit easier. Now, while using an item won't always do something, and sometimes it's better to just avoid them altogether, don't, experimenting with curios is definitely worth trying. And the game does remember what each combination does for you too, so the next time you find that rotting food tray, you'll be prepared to... Wow! If you somehow make it through all that though, and you manage to complete your current quest, you get rewarded with a chunk of gold, a special equip item, and some materials you can use in the future to upgrade your hamlet. You don't have super deep pockets though, so you have to wind up making some tough calls on what to keep or abandon if you run out of inventory space midway through a mission.
Ditch the food? Yeah. No, we haven't been hunger checked. I'm gonna regret this.
And I think this is a good chance for me to bring up the core aspect of the entire Darkest Dungeon package. Stress. As you might expect, exploring catacombs filled with the unvaccinated is a decidedly unfun thing to do. So to help keep track of how freaked out by everything your team is, there's this little white meter below their HP bar that represents their stress. The meter can fill in a number of different ways, but you'll quickly find out how important it is to keep that thing as low as humanly possible. Eventually, though, they are bound to hit their breaking point, after which there's a good chance you'll be faced with a very harsh reality.
Dazed, reeling, about to break.
Your party can turn against you. When a hero can no longer handle the strain of their situation, they become afflicted, and afflicted heroes throw all kinds of wrenches into your plans. On top of getting a stat debuff, they also get given a special personality quirk that sticks with them till their stress goes back down to 0. For example, if someone becomes fearful, they'll sometimes retreat further to the back of the line when their turn starts, all the while shouting about how doomed the rest of your party is, which then causes them to get more stressed out for an insanity chain reaction. Side note, insanity chain reaction would be a great name for a metal band. No matter which affliction you have, though, you can be sure that at some point you're gonna get screwed over by it. Maybe the afflicted hero pulls a Charizard on you, ignoring your commands or even just passing their turn entirely. Or worse, maybe your newly paranoid hero decides that everybody else in the party is secretly a monster in disguise, so he just... Now having said that though, getting fully stressed out isn't necessarily a death sentence either. During the virtue check, there's a small chance that your hero finds their inner strength in their moment of weakness and goes all cool guy mode instead. Heroes in that state become virtuous, and as you can probably guess, it has the opposite effect that becoming afflicted does. On top of getting a pretty decent stat buff, they'll start just randomly helping the party out on their own. Things like giving away free heals or saying something heroic that calms everyone else down a little bit. And while an afflicted hero can completely wreck a dungeon run, a virtuous hero can single-handedly save it, and those tense couple of seconds where you're waiting to see the results of their virtue check are incredibly well executed.
Funny scream, funny scream.
Either way, that stress bar does carry over when the quest is finished, so to avoid immediately going insane again, you'll want to let that quivering party member take some time off in the various leisure facilities around the hamlet. Alternatively, getting someone down to 0 stress mid-mission works too, which makes heroes that have stress healing skills super valuable during those longer quests. For example, the Houndmaster can take a large portion of stress from somebody by using his amazing ability of Pet Dog.
You see, petting the dog is one of the most relaxing things you can possibly do. It releases a hormone called oxytocin, which reduces stress.
But even if you manage to gather the perfect party, even if you have enough money to bring as many supplies as you could ever possibly need, and even if you masterfully mow down every single enemy that stands in your way, you should always keep one bit of advice in mind.
Remind yourself that overconfidence is a slow and insidious killer.
Let me ask y'all something. How do you feel about RNG? I cannot stress enough just how far out of traditional RPG territory this game truly is. Something you discover immediately is that almost nothing here is ever fully in your control. You can plan all you want, and buff up your party with the best items and quirks you could possibly find, but sometimes all it takes is a single bad turn to completely throw things off the rails. You will get unlucky, you will have to make sacrifices, and you will end up with the elevated blood pressure to put Yosemite Sam to shame. Alright, I've lost 2 of my teammates already, but I only need to find 1 more box of medicine to clear this quest. If the next room has the last box of medicine and nothing else goes wrong, I can finish up and take all this loot back with me to the... oh god.
Great adversity has a beauty. It is the fire that tempers.
Now I know this sounds strange, but that feeling of uncertainty is one of the biggest reasons as to why I always come back to this game. I keep making references to other RPGs, but I don't want to make it sound like I don't enjoy them. It just so often gets to the point of mindless grinding, you know? You run around in place for an hour and spam half A presses until you max out your level, and you never have to put any real thought into things aside from occasionally switching to a new move. Here though, every single fight keeps you on your toes. In all my years playing RPGs, I've never had an experience quite like this one, where I'm always super invested in each and every decision I end up making. And once you start to understand how certain enemies work, and how you keep getting shafted, you can start to make smarter decisions. Maybe you keep getting killed when your party gets shuffled, so to counter that, you start to bring a few skills that let you move back in place without wasting your turn. Or maybe you keep getting stressed out to the point where your entire team just falls apart on its own, so you decide to equip items that reduce the overall amount of stress damage they take. Don't get me wrong though, the odds are absolutely stacked against you, but overcoming that skewed RNG is such a satisfying feeling. But I do understand why some people might be turned off by that lack of control. Yes, it absolutely sucks when all the enemies on Earth decide to gang up on that one unlucky hero. And you'll probably feel like you lost an entire month of your lifespan whenever you get hit by a really bad crit.
Still not worth it. Not worth the debuff. Definitely not worth the— Oh, God!
But when you turn the tables and get a crit yourself, oh ho ho ho!
Seriously, that was the absolute best you could do?
Impossible! Impossible! Impossible!
Fine then. It's my turn, right?
But since your heroes do die so frequently, leveling up replacements becomes a fairly common occurrence, and that's something that I think this game deserves a lot of praise for. Its grind doesn't actually feel like a grind. Nothing kills the momentum of an RPG faster than having to boost up your underleveled characters, so how does that kind of thing work in this game? Well, the heroes in Darkest Dungeon can only be raised to a level of 6 at the most, and every 2 levels represents what missions they will and won't partake in. For example, a max level character will refuse to waste his amazing talents with a quote-unquote child's play beginner dungeon. But then he dies to a floor trap because hubris never helped anyone. Overall, the game becomes this cycle of doing missions, raising up new heroes, dying, and upgrading your hamlet until you're finally confident enough to take on the bosses that appear at each location. And once you feel strong enough, you can go ahead and try your hand at taking down the castle that looms menacingly in the background at all times. Again though, if you haven't gotten enough experience in the different ways the game can mess with you, it probably won't go the way you're hoping to if you just decide to swoosh on in there.
Watch me swoosh right in! Swoosh!
As the game tells you itself when you boot it up, Darkest Dungeon is about making the most of a bad situation, and once you played it a bit yourself, you'll understand just how disturbingly frequently that comes into play. Every time you succeed, you get stronger. Every time you fail, you get wiser. And every time you target the madman, you'll miss.
And then I fired again, and then I missed, and then I fired, and then I fired, and I missed. I missed both times, and then I fired, and I missed. This went on for several hours, and then I fired, and then I missed.
But now, as we reach the end of our tour, I want to go ahead and try to aid any new Dungeoneers that decide to give this game a shot. These are really just a few tips that I wish I had known when I first started, so I hope they help a few of you out in your playthroughs too. Before you attack any enemy, you can hover your mouse over that enemy to see how likely your current skill is to connect, as well as the possible damage it might inflict. Putting an antiquarian in your party gives you extra inventory space. She'll also frequently find extra valuables from Curios, so be sure to let her interact with anything that might have treasure in it. If you have the Crimson Court DLC installed and you see one of these chests, do not use a key on it. Just trust me, you'll be glad you didn't. Moves that have a chance of inflicting something, like say bleed, stun, or a debuff, have a % chance of actually being successful. You might think that a 100% chance of inflicting blight means it's guaranteed, but before it actually goes through, it subtracts the enemy's resistances from itself first. So a 100% chance of stun minus a 40% resistance totals out to a 60% chance of actually stunning that enemy. If you're trying to upgrade some of your town's buildings, but you find you're 1 or 2 paintings short, you can hit these little arrows down here to bring up the heirloom trade menu. And finally, if you find yourself face to face with a Swine King, you'll see he has this little minion hiding behind him. I cannot emphasize enough just how important it is that you—
I hate this channel.
No! Now weirdly enough, even though I know this game won't be for everyone, I would still recommend it to everyone. If you're not a fan of how turn-based RPGs usually feel, then I think Darkest Dungeon breaks enough molds to be worth a shot. With how important each decision is, and with how well-earned your victories feel, you might find yourself getting sucked in more than you'd expect. If you are a fan of RPGs though, then I'll double down on my recommendation. It's such a breath of fresh air to the genre that, despite only managing to beat it that one time, I still rank it as one of my favorite video games. But whether you play the game as is, or hop onto Steam to download a mod that gives everyone big bazongas, ultimately, the choice does fall on you. So, what'll it be? Will you press onwards until your family's name is restored to the honor and prestige it once had, overcoming the cloying evil of the estate? Or will you lose yourself to that madness, and be unable to return from the ravenous, clutching shadows
of the darkest dungeon?
To get us started, though, I want to shine a spotlight on the gameplay first, because this thing is just really fun. It's just good.
He has such a way with words.
And therein lies the difference between Darkest Dungeon and most other RPGs. There's never going to be one right answer to take, and if you have the Crimson Corn DLC, this little icon below an enemy's HP bar tells you they haven't moved yet. So sometimes it's better to disable a prime or will you lose yourself to madness and eventually or will you eventually play Frolf? Will you lose yourself to madness and play Frolf eventually?